Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor Jon V. Kofas is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive bombing of Tehran, killing the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei Ali. This bombing was the second one in the last 8 months. The last one was in June. The bombing in June and the bombing in late February, early March have one thing in common, namely the pretext that Iran was about to develop nuclear weapons. Now, the question is, what did the United States and Israel announce after bombing Iran in June 2025? Namely, they announced that the mission was successful, that they had taken out Iran's capability of developing nuclear weapons. Yet, on February 28, 2026, President Trump and the government in Tel Aviv, headed by Benjamin Netanyahu, claimed that the mission in 2026 was to make sure that Iran would not develop nuclear weapons within days. Now, that is a contradiction of what they claimed back in June 2025. This much a number of astute observers, including U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, pointed out. Bernie Sanders pointed out, well, if we took out their nuclear capability in June 2025, why are we making a repeat of this? Clearly, the pretext of Iran having the imminent capacity of developing nuclear weapons is insulting, especially even to countries, some Arab countries that are not necessarily pro-Iranian, considering that there were negotiations between the Iranian side and the United States to make sure that Iran never develops nuclear weapons. And in return, of course, that the US lifts sanctions and that Iran gets some breathing room to pursue economic development, which it desperately wants, considering that the sanctions against Iran by the US-led allies, not just one country, but allies, have meant enormous hardship for the Iranian people. It is very difficult to determine what to believe once the war started on February 28th. Today is March 3rd, 4 days later. And the reason is because governments put a spin on everything they want, all sides, by the way, not just the US and Israel, Iran included, and those that are on the side of Iran. Everyone puts a spin on what they want the public to believe. The ideological perspective, the political loyalties, the goal that the analyst is trying, or the news organization is trying to achieve by putting out a story, determines how they analyze and the degree of how they analyze what is happening on the ground. Iran launching missiles, US and Israel launching missiles, against Iran. The bottom line is that this war, um, in the age of social media and in the age of artificial intelligence, has a great deal of misinformation. And until the dust settles, we will not know what really unfolded. What is important is that from 1979, the Iranian Revolution, to the present, this current war in early spring 2026 against Iran by Israel and the United States, all this time, Israel and the United States have been sworn enemies of Iran, and they have tried to undermine it and bring back the good old days of the Shah of Iran, before, from which who was installed, by the way, by the CIA in 1953, when the CIA overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh, duly elected leader, prime minister of Iran, and installed the Shah loyal to the West and to Israel. They want that kind of a regime. The question is that kind of a regime possible? U.S. And Israel, from 1979 to 2026, have a long-standing history of trying to destabilize Iran, of assassinating a huge number of Iranian officials, from top level like the Ayatollah Khamenei to scientists, Iranian scientists, and of course, not to mention civilians, because let me point out at this juncture that the ultimate victims in all wars from ancient times to the present are indeed civilians. The war that Israel and the United States launched against Iran has many civilian targets and victims. The idea that missiles pinpoint at a specific individual and have no collateral damage is absurd. They kill civilians intentionally and inadvertently. They kill civilians. So this is a war crime, exactly as some have characterized it. The fact is, in the middle of negotiations between the United States and Iran, there was suddenly bombing of the country and killing of its supreme leader. And negotiations, the diplomatic negotiations, were completely a facade. If anything, it fooled the other side that they could achieve a diplomatic solution to the differences that existed between Iran and the United States, which, by the way, is the one that retreated from the 2015 multilateral nuclear treaty that Iran had signed, never to develop nuclear weapons. The United States unilaterally, under Trump, withdrew from that in the first administration. So the record there speaks for itself. Now, all the noise that is made about the intention of the United States and Israel to bring about freedom and democracy and popular sovereignty to the people of Iran is noise. The concern about Iranian women is just noise. The reality is there is no such concern about Muslim women, either on the part of Israel or the United States, in Gaza, where a genocide had been unfolding. delivered by Israel and supported by the United States. Those women, Muslim women, were targets. Children in Gaza were targets. No concern about them. On the contrary, the United States and Israel vilified the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice and the United Nations for doing their job and bringing out the evidence of genocide in Gaza. No concern about those Muslim women, but supposedly there's a lot of concern about Iranian Muslim women. The idea also of democracy, bringing democracy and freedom to Iran. Well, if Norway were to make such a statement, it would actually be credible because Norway actually is a country committed to freedom and democracy and social justice above all. Neither Israel nor the United States are, not according to me, but according to international organizations that rank Israel and the United States in terms of their commitment to human rights, democracy, freedom, and the treatment of minorities within their own borders. Okay. Now, the question is, of course, where is all this headed? And in all wars from ancient times to the present, scholars who deal with not just military history, but they cover diplomatic and political history and analyze conflicts between nations, international relations, look at the war aims of a country. First of all, let me begin by stating that the impression the United States left, as well as Israel, was that within a couple of days all this would be over. The couple of days have come and gone. Then it was a couple of weeks. Now it's a couple of months, at most 6 months. At most 6 months. I want to remind, as a historian for decades, who I used to teach in higher education, when World War I broke out, all sides, by the way, not just the Germans, but all sides were optimistic that this would be a short-lived war. It would be all over within a few weeks, at most a month and a half. It lasted 4 years. No one can predict how long a war would last. Take Vietnam, right? Vietnam is another case. It just went on and on from the Eisenhower administration to Ford. So what we have is the idea that you can control the outcome of a war is absurd. Things can get out of hand. Obviously, the worst case scenario is a global conflict. A regional conflict is already in the works. Iran made sure that those supporting the US and Israel, namely the Gulf states, were targeted, at least their military operations, their military bases, but some non-military targets as well. So it's already a regional conflict with consequences for all of the Middle East, but actually the consequences are global because the economy is impacted, considering the Middle East is a major supplier of gas and oil to the world. And that has a spiraling effect. It has a rippling effect throughout the global economy at a time that the global economy is not doing that well to begin with. It's in a very slow growth mode, especially in the transatlantic global West. The global South is doing, the China-India-led global South is doing a little bit better, but the global economy is not in such a good shape in 2026. And this comes along to obviously make matters worse. The war aims of the United States were regime change. Let's look at that. Iran has been a Muslim country since the 8th century, after the 11th, to be more accurate, after the 11th, we have slightly a majority, about 50% estimated, about half the population turning Muslim. Now, of course, the vast majority is Muslim, Shia Muslim, of course, today. For 1,000 years, the culture, society, the value system, the ideology of Iran is immersed in Islam. This is not to argue that modernity, technology, industrial development, the influences of the rest of the world, especially Western countries, and especially under the Shah of Iran, who was quintessentially secular, by the way, have not influenced the 90 million population of Iran. They are part of the world capitalist economy as well, so they're influenced by it. This is not to say that there is not a segment of Iranian society who are adamantly against the theocratic regime. This is not to say that the theocratic regime is an ideal regime, has been an ideal regime committed to social justice and human rights. That's all true. However, the idea of the United States installing a pro-West, pro-US, pro-Israel regime in Iran, the way it did in 1953, when it overthrew Mohammad Mosaddegh and installed the Shah of Iran, the idea of doing that in 2026, after decades-long theocratic regime, as flawed as it has been, the record of the regime speaks for itself. Now, this is not to argue that the regime had not been always under Western sanctions, Western pressure, with all of that. That's all true. However, honesty is the best policy when analyzing all sides. And it is not true that that regime, from the Ayatollah Khamenei to Khamenei today, has been an ideal regime for social justice for the people of Iran. That's not true at all. It has been a regime that has had a lot of enemies, including the Sunni Arab majority, by the way, next door to it, around, in other words, its neighbors, but especially Israel and the United States, trying to destabilize it all this time. Now, that does not mean, when we look at public opinion polls, that the Iranian people are waiting with open arms to welcome Israelis and Americans as the saviors of Iran. That is delusional thinking. Iranians, even the secular Iranians, as much as they may despise the theocratic regime, want, like all people on this planet in each nation state, a regime that comes from their own tradition, their own history, their own culture, their own religion. They don't want to have an imported entity and to have that regime as though the regime itself is a commodity, and to have it imported from the United States and Israel, and to have that regime loyal to Israel and the United States. That strategy has been tried and failed. The US tried to install a regime under military occupation in Afghanistan, and the Taliban are back. They tried the same in Iraq, and Iraq is as pro-Iranian as ever. So what we have here is delusional thinking and a last desperate effort by the United States to prevent China from asserting its hegemony economically, not militarily the way US is doing it, economically in the Middle East and of course next door to in Africa. I want to invite all of you to look at the analytical video where I analyze all of this more in depth. This is ongoing, and it is not easy to predict when this will be all over. One hopes it will be over today, because wars, as I said, have civilians as its victims. However, the signs as of right now are not optimistic because Iran's back is to the wall after their leader was assassinated, and even people who were on the fence did not particularly. One would have to assume they're not masochistic and they do not want pain inflicted and insult inflicted on the nation and want to invite militarist intervention and bombing of their country by Israel and the United States, who have decades long record of wanting to destabilize Iran and to install a regime of their own liking. I thank you for listening. Please join this channel, write questions and comments. Thank you very much.